This week, we're going to be looking at what makes communities more vulnerable to earthquakes and what can communities do to protect themselves and prevent as much damage from happening. So there's three things to consider: physical factors, social factors, and economic factors. Physical factors is to do with the earthquake itself. What is the magnitude of the event? How strong is the earthquake? How far are the seismic waves going to reach? The second is social factors. How many people live in that area near the hazard? And lastly, economic factors is to do with the vulnerability of the people affected. So this is linked to poverty. How much money does that community have to be able to rebuild itself after the earthquake has happened? Firstly, let's look at social factors in more detail. It is estimated that 67 large cities, each with more than 100,000 people living in them, are close to volcanic regions. The number of people at risk from earthquakes is even larger than this. Therefore, the more people living near an earthquake, the greater the threat to human life. One region at greatest risk is the Pacific Ring of Fire. Now you can see this highlighted with the orange on the map. This is an area in the Pacific Ocean which touches all the way across to New Zealand and Japan, and then all the way over to California in America and down the coast of South America. Over 450 of the world's active volcanoes are located here. But there's also over 1 billion people living in these areas also. Next, let's look at economic factors. People in low-income countries are more vulnerable to the threat of tectonic hazards because of their poor health services, lack of emergency services, and poorly built houses and structures. In Shillong, a city in northeast India, over 90,000 of the 400,000 inhabitants are at risk from earthquakes because they live in cheaply constructed multi-storey buildings which cannot cope. Many are on steep hillsides, locations which would easily collapse, crushing all in sight. It's not the earthquake that kills people. It's the building which they are trapped in which is going to kill people. So how do we reduce the impact of hazard? Firstly, scientists are constantly monitoring the ground to see if there's any hints or indications that an earthquake or volcano may happen. Secondly, educating people. Educate people about what to do and have regular earthquake drills can help people living in these places which are prone to earthquakes to know how to cope if one actually happens. Thirdly, have a good emergency service team. People that are trained to cope in these situations and know exactly what to do. Lastly, we are now building buildings which are designed to survive earthquakes. These can be seen in skyscrapers in San Francisco to community centres in Indonesia. Buildings are now being designed so that they will not collapse in an earthquake.